For thousands of years, humans have built weapons. The club, the axe, the spear, the sword, the bow and arrow. We know all of these. They appear in every museum and every movie. But the deadliest weapon ancient humans ever made was none of them. It was not big. It was not heavy. It was not expensive. In fact, it was almost nothing. A piece of cord, a small pouch, and a stone. That was all. Yet this simple tool could kill a man at a great distance. It made almost no sound. It was the sling. And it was, by any measure, the deadliest weapon of the ancient world. This is the story of that forgotten weapon. A story that begins with nothing more than string and stone. Long before metal, humans discovered something terrifying. A way to kill from a distance. A way to fight without ever being seen. Before we go further, let us be clear about what a sling actually is. A sling is a very simple weapon. It is made of a length of cord or leather. In the middle of that cord sits a small pouch. You place a stone in the pouch. You hold both ends of the cord. You swing the sling above your head, faster and faster. Then at the right moment, you release one end. The stone flies out. It flies at incredible speed. That is the whole idea. It sounds almost too simple to be dangerous, but simplicity is exactly what made it so deadly. It is the oldest way humans found to throw a stone much faster and farther than the arm alone ever could. In many ways, it is the ancestor of every ranged weapon that followed. Every arrow, every bullet, every missile owes something to the sling. It proved that a human could strike beyond arm's reach. To understand the sling, you must understand what it does to the arm. A thrown stone can only go as fast as your hand moves, but a sling acts like an extension of the arm. It makes the throwing arm effectively much longer, and a longer lever means more speed. The pouch at the end of the cord can reach speeds far beyond the hand. When the stone is released, it carries all that speed with it. Think of it like a whip. The tip of a whip travels faster than the hand that holds it. The sling works on the same principle. A skilled slinger could throw a stone at over 150 kilometers per hour. Some estimates say even faster. That is faster than many modern cars. And that speed means force. A sling stone could crack a skull. It could break bones. It could kill, all with a piece of string. The release is everything. Timing must be perfect. Release too early and the stone flies high. Release too late and it flies into the ground. The sling was not just fast, it was also long range. A thrown spear travels only a few dozen meters. A bow can reach farther, but only if it is well made. But a sling could strike targets hundreds of meters away. Ancient writers described sling stones flying over 400 meters. That is 4 football fields. That is farther than most archers could ever shoot. From that distance, an enemy could not even see who threw the stone. The attack came from nowhere, and that was part of its terror. A soldier could fall without ever hearing a warning, without ever seeing the enemy. That is a special kind of fear. Ancient sources speak of ranges that seem almost impossible. Modern tests confirm many of these claims. The sling genuinely was a long-range weapon. So why was the sling so deadly? The answer is a combination of many things. First, it was silent. A bowstring twangs, an arrow whistles, a spear is thrown with a visible motion, but a sling makes almost no sound, just a faint whoosh if anything. A stone could arrive before you ever knew it was coming. Second, the ammunition was everywhere. The ground itself was the slinger's arsenal. Rivers were full of smooth, perfect stones. A slinger never ran out of bullets. Third, a sling was cheap beyond belief. Anyone could make one. A child could carry one. A shepherd could hide one in his clothes. Fourth, it was light and small. It weighed almost nothing. It took up no space in a bag. A slinger could run, climb, and hide with ease. It was the perfect weapon for the poor, the young, and the desperate. Fifth, it worked in any weather. Rain did not ruin a sling the way it ruined a bowstring. Cold did not crack it. It was always ready. Sixth, it was terrifying. A man could not defend against what he could not see. The fear was itself a weapon. The sling is astonishingly old. It is older than the bow, older than writing, older than the wheel, older than the first cities. The sling appears in the very earliest human settlements. Archaeologists have found sling stones thousands of years old. Some date back to the Neolithic. That is over 7,000 years ago. And the sling may be far older still. Because a sling is made of leather and cord, it rots away. Only the stones survive. So the true age of the sling is hidden from us. But one thing is certain. It has been with us for an extremely long time. It was one of humanity's first true ranged weapons. Sling stones have been found on every inhabited continent. They are among the most common artifacts of the ancient world. Yet they are almost always overlooked. The sling is so old that we cannot name its inventor. No single person invented it. It emerged wherever people and stones met. In the beginning, the sling was a tool for survival. Early farmers used it to protect their fields. Birds and small animals were driven away with stones. Shepherds used it to guide their flocks. A well-placed stone could turn a wandering sheep back to the herd. It was a tool of the field, not the battlefield. It fed families. It guarded herds. It protected crops. But a tool this good does not stay peaceful for long. Soon armies took notice, and the sling became a weapon of war. A shepherd's tool had become an instrument of death. A sling could bring down a bird in flight. It could kill a wolf that threatened the flock. It was the shepherd's constant companion. The most famous slinger in history is a young shepherd. His name was David. You probably know the story. day, a giant warrior named Goliath challenged the armies of Israel. Goliath was enormous. He wore heavy armor. He carried a spear and a sword. No soldier dared to face him. But David stepped forward. He carried no sword, no spear, no shield, no armor. Only a sling and 5 smooth stones. David placed a stone in the sling. He swung it, and he released. The stone struck Goliath in the forehead. The giant fell. One stone had defeated an armored giant. The story of David and Goliath is a story about the sling. It shows that a small weapon in the right hands can defeat the biggest enemy. It is a story told for 3,000 years, and it is still told today. David chose 5 stones, but he needed only one. That single stone changed the course of a battle, and it made the sling famous forever. Goliath never saw it coming. He fell before the armies even understood what happened. But David was not alone. An entire people became famous for the sling. They came from the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean. They were called the Balearic slingers, and they were considered the finest slingers in the ancient world. They trained from the time they were children. Legend says a mother would not give her child food until the child struck it with a stone. Imagine learning to sling before you could even eat. They carried 3 slings at once, one for long range, one for medium range, and one for close range. They were so skilled that they could choose where a stone would land. They could hit a man from hundreds of meters away. They could even break an enemy's sword arm with a single stone. Armies across the Mediterranean hired them as mercenaries. Hannibal himself used Balearic slingers in his armies. They fought in the great wars between Rome and Carthage, and they were feared by everyone who faced them. The Balearic Islands produced the elite soldiers of the sling. For them, the sling was not a tool. It was a way of life. The Balearic slinger was a professional. War was his trade, and the sling was his craft. He was paid well for his deadly skill. Few soldiers wanted to face him. They were feared from Spain to the Middle East. Kings paid fortunes for their service. The Romans too learned the power of the sling. At first they faced slingers as enemies, and they learned respect the hard way. Soon the Romans employed their own slingers. Roman armies included units of slingers called funditors. They stood behind the heavy infantry and rained stones on the enemy before the battle even truly began. A Roman slinger could soften an enemy line from far away. By the time the swords met, the enemy was already wounded and terrified. The sling, in other words, helped Rome conquer the world. It was the unsung weapon of the Roman legions. The sword gets the glory, but the sling did the quiet, deadly work. Roman writers recorded the terror of facing slingers. They spoke of stones that came from beyond sight, and of wounds that appeared from nowhere. The legions carried slings as standard equipment. Even the heaviest soldier had one tucked away. As the sling became more advanced, so did its ammunition. Slingers began using lead bullets instead of stones. Lead is heavy. Heavy means more force on impact. Lead bullets were smaller than stones, but far more deadly. They flew faster. They hit harder. And because they were small, they were almost impossible to see in flight. By the time you saw it, it was too late. Many lead bullets were inscribed with words. Some carried the name of the commander. Others carried insults to the enemy. Some simply said catch. Imagine a soldier reading catch on a bullet as it flies toward him. Thousands of these bullets have been found by archaeologists. They are tiny, cold reminders of an ancient and deadly art. Each one is a message from the past, a message of war, humor, and death. The lead bullet was a cruel innovation. It punched through flesh and even light armor. It made the sling more lethal than ever. The Greeks also knew the sling well. The great writer Xenophon praised slingers. He described how slingers could outrange enemy archers. In Greek armies, slingers guarded the flanks. They were light, fast, and deadly. A Greek slinger could retreat while still throwing stones behind him. This made them almost impossible to catch. They could fight while running away. Few weapons offered that kind of freedom. The sling gave the smallest soldier a voice on the battlefield. It was the great equalizer of ancient warfare. A poor man with a sling could threaten a rich man in armor. The Greeks had slingers from Rhodes and elsewhere. These specialists were prized in every army. They could turn the tide of a skirmish. Xenophon wrote that slingers could outrange the Persians. That was a decisive advantage. The sling was not confined to one corner of the world. Almost every ancient culture had some version of it. The Egyptians used slings. The Assyrians used slings. The Persians used slings. The peoples of the Andes used slings. The sling appears in the art of ancient Peru. Native American cultures used it too. So did the peoples of the Middle East. The sling was one of the most widespread weapons in human history. Everywhere there were stones, there were slings. It crossed oceans. It crossed deserts. It crossed mountains. It was the universal weapon of the ancient world. And that universality is a sign of just how effective it was. People do not keep a weapon for 7,000 years if it does not work. In the Americas, the sling was used for hunting and war. In Africa, it guarded herds and homes. In Asia, it served armies for millennia. As time passed, people made the sling even more powerful. One upgrade was the staff sling. A staff sling is a sling attached to the end of a long pole. The pole acts as an even longer lever. It could throw heavier stones. It could throw them even farther. The staff sling was used in sieges. Defenders could hurl stones down from walls. The staff sling survived long after the hand sling faded. It was still used in the Middle Ages. Even when the sword and the bow ruled the battlefield, the humble sling in its staff form hung on. It refused to disappear. The staff sling could launch stones over walls. It was a favorite of besieging armies. It kept the sling alive when the hand sling faded. Many people wonder why the bow replaced the sling. The two weapons were rivals for thousands of years. slingers. In some ways, the sling was superior. It had longer range, it was quieter, it was cheaper, and its ammunition was free. But the bow had one great advantage. It was easier to learn. A man could be taught to use a bow in weeks, but mastering a sling took years. Armies need many soldiers fast, so they chose the weapon that was quicker to learn. The sling required a lifetime of skill, and in a world of mass armies, that was too expensive. So the sling slowly faded from the great battlefields. In trained hands, the sling outranged the early bow, but training took a lifetime, and armies wanted soldiers, not artists. So if the sling was so deadly, why do we hear so little about it today? Why does every child know the sword but not the sling? The answer has several parts. First, the sling was a weapon of the common people. It was not glamorous. No king was crowned with a sling. The sword became a symbol of power and nobility. The sling remained a tool of shepherds and poor soldiers. History prefers to remember the rich and the powerful, and the rich preferred the sword. Second, the sling demanded incredible skill. It took years of daily practice to master. A bow was easier to learn, so armies gradually replaced slingers with archers. The skill began to die out, and once a skill dies, it is hard to bring back. Third, gunpowder eventually made every ancient weapon obsolete. But the sling was one of the last to disappear. In some corners of the world, it survived into modern times. The sling did not lose because it was weak. It lost because the world changed around it. The sling faded, but its shadow remained. Every later ranged weapon carried its DNA. The idea of striking from afar began with the sling. Today, the sling is almost forgotten, but it has not vanished completely. Shepherds in some remote regions still use it. Sporting clubs keep the art alive. There are even modern slinging competitions. People measure how far and how accurately they can throw. Modern slingers can still throw stones astonishing distances. The ancient skill has not been entirely lost, and historians now look back at the sling with new respect. They call it one of the most underrated weapons in history, a weapon that deserves far more fame than it ever received, a weapon that shaped the ancient world in silence. Enthusiasts now study the old techniques. They rebuild ancient slings from old descriptions, and they prove the old weapon still works. The sling lives on as a sport and a study, a ghost of the ancient battlefield. And that brings us back to our first question. What was the deadliest weapon ancient humans ever made? It was not the club. It was not the axe. It was not the spear. It was not the sword. It was not even the bow. It was the sling. A piece of cord, a small pouch, and a stone. Three simple things. Together, they became a weapon that could kill at 400 meters. A weapon that was silent, cheap, and always loaded. A weapon that brought down giants. A weapon that helped build empires. A weapon that armed the poor against the powerful. And a weapon that history almost forgot. The sling is proof that the deadliest things are often the simplest. It is a reminder that power does not always come in a grand form. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is just a boy, a cord, and a stone. And now you know the story of the deadliest weapon ancient humans ever made. The next time you pick up a smooth stone, remember, in the right hands, that stone was once a weapon of war. A weapon that decided battles and brought down giants. It deserves to be remembered. It was and is the deadliest weapon ancient humans ever made.